Take cover!
Hey, it's Snacks, and I've got a somewhat unexpected but still very cool video for you guys today. And it's going to be about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. So this game has surprised me in so many ways, and I'll tell you right now, it's one of the best games I have played in the past year. I'm not even exaggerating, and I know it's saying a lot because there were a ton of great games in 2024. I honestly think that it's that good. With that said, I don't think it's for everyone, but even if it might not be your cup of tea, I don't think any serious gamer can play this thing and say it's not a well-made game. The gaming session took place at Team Liquid's Alienware training facility in Los Angeles, which was such an awesome place to visit and could probably be a separate video in itself. I also want to give a huge shout out to our good friend Sir Tobi, who was gracious enough to chat with us a little bit about the game. So you'll see some of his comments throughout this video, and you can also check out an uncut version of the interview on the channel soon. Right off the bat, when I started playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, I knew I was in for a treat. After just the very first sequence and having just spent some time playing the first game, I didn't shake the feeling that the first game, which by the way I thought was pretty good from the limited time that I got to play it, it set the table and it was given a complete upgrade, which we see in the second game. I think they did a great job of leaving in the strengths of what worked well in the first game, while improving on the areas that they thought were weak. So while I was playing for the first hour, I tried to take as many mental notes as I can, and this might be kind of weird for many of you guys who might notice graphics first. The first thing I want to give props to is the sound design. Now, the thing about good sound design in this kind of video game, for me anyway, is that you don't want fantastical sounds or unnatural sounds. You don't want to get too gimmicky with the sounds, and I prefer that subtle mix that keeps you immersed in that world. So immersion versus distraction is what you want. So I wanted to give props to the sound design because this being the type of game that it is, the layman might not realize how good a job they did. It was a perfect match for a game that is rooted in realism. I also love knowing that the inspiration and design came from actual real-world places in history. Sir Tobi was telling us how Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is going to focus on realistic medieval and historical events during the 15th century in Bohemia, which is currently known as Czech Republic, and it was during the reign of King Wenceslas IV in the Holy Roman Empire. Now, majority of the game is going to take place in the vicinities of Kuttenberg and the Bohemian Paradise, and they also added in weapons which were available during that time, like the crossbow and the fusils, which were early firearms.
So the studio is based in today's Czech Republic. Back in the days when it's 1403, that's where the game takes place. It was called the Kingdom of Bohemia and was part of the Holy Roman Empire. Now all those things, I'm name dropping those are really not important. If you play the game without knowing history or being afraid of, oh my god, that's a historical game and I don't know crap about that.
You can just go into it without knowing any of that.
Exactly, you absolutely do not need to know these things. If you don't, then it's, as I said, a game about knights and castles and so on. However, if you know, then there's this little thing in the there's like based on real history or based on true events and so on. That's just, for me, it gives me this little tickle when I watch movies that have that. So it's the story of 1403. It's the Holy Roman Empire, and at that point in Czech Republic, they had a king that was more interested in hunting and women and so on, and he was perceived to be a weak king. So his half-brother, the king of Hungary by that time, he came to country and faked that he's going to help him get back to the throne and that the people will like him, but in reality he abducted his own brother and started to ransack the country, and that is where your story takes place.
I also need to give props to Warhorse Studios for something that I kept noticing that isn't quite specific, but goes along with the theme of immersion. And that's that they did a fantastic job of world building in general. But more specifically, just the scale and the details of the world that they created, from the buildings to the topography, even the smaller details like the flowers, and the way things were laid out and placed in the map and used in the world to tell a story.
I'm getting in, whether you like it.
One other thing we have to touch on is the voice acting.
That is fucking impressive.
I thought the voice acting was very good.
Berghoff must be made of money.
For me, there's nothing worse than bad voice acting, and that will automatically take you out of the game. And the thing with voice acting is that sometimes even decent voice acting just doesn't cut it. You really need to have very good voice acting, and sometimes it's the difference between a pretty good game and a great game. If you think about it, there are dozens of elements in the game that all add up to really shape up to create the game as a whole, and sometimes if one of those elements falls short, it might just pull me out of the game. In my playthrough of the game, which was probably about 5 hours, I really appreciated the voice acting, starting with Henry to even the smaller characters.
I'm more worried about it being too deep.
Come on.
Kingdom Come Deliverance 1. Like, did you guys ever imagine it would be as successful as it was?
Well, kinda yes and no. I mean, we absolutely trusted the product. That's why we were so fighting for it. But having now sold, what, like 8 million copies or so, that is hard to imagine, especially if that is like, you have to consider this was a Kickstarter project, it's a debut title and so on. Now, of course, 8 million, it's a funny number because the gaming industry is really so...
It's like, if you think about it, it's 8 million people. It's a full arena of people who have just, not just an arena.
And there was even like a free Epic deal where I think like 6 million people also downloaded it. So theoretically, there's
14.
But you know, there's people who download, never started. So
Yeah.
But the good thing is the first game absolutely financed the second game. So that is already good because it helps the studio to grow and to jump on the next project, of course. But we have would have never expected that it's like going that good. And now with KCD2 being announced, funny enough, this year, 2024, we sold another 2 million copies. So that's like in between the announcement and now. So people are now jumping back, exactly feeling if they missed out or whatever, and want to see the first game. And which I go and play the first game unless you don't want to, because you don't have to in order to enjoy the second.
Same thing with history. You don't have to know about the history of Czech Republic for you to understand
no, absolutely
the story.
Not. I mean, you played the game now, and you, I guess, don't remember so good the first game. So you tell the people if you feel like it told you what you need to know in the beginning.
Yeah, I feel like it did tell... Wait, I'm the one interviewing you. But yeah, I did get to play it, and I did feel like not only did the game was able to help me get caught up to speed, but they did it in a way that was creative.
Yes.
And not forced.
Yes.
Now let's talk about graphics. So remember when I said that mediocre voice acting pulls me out of the immersion in games? So I know this might be kind of weird, but mediocre graphics or graphics that aren't super hyper realistic doesn't really bother me. And I don't really lose my immersion as long as all the other stuff is good, like the storytelling, the voice acting, and so on and so forth. I guess it's because I like to play a lot of older games sometimes. So that's a little background on me regarding graphics. But the point is, the first Kingdom Come Deliverance, I thought had pretty good graphics. And even with that said, this game really cranks up the graphics and takes it on a whole nother level. All of the details of the character models, to the petals on flowers and foliage, everything in the world looked absolutely amazing. Even things like the lighting and different settings in the day.
Again, it was their own fault.
What do you mean?
Christ! When did you learn to swim?
Okay, so here's the part I had a little trouble with in the game, especially with the first one, and that's the combat. So in the first game, it felt kind of slow, maybe a little bit too deliberate, and kind of bumpy for my taste, because I've never really played anything like it before. So in the second game, it did feel better for me. It felt a little more intuitive and snappy. Now, maybe it also had to do with the fact that I got enough reps in to get used to it with Kingdom Come Deliverance 1. Eventually, something kind of clicked, and things like the parry and the location-based targeting for your swings or blocks started to feel just much more natural and rewarding. And to their credit, I understand the approach to a more realistic style of combat. This isn't some fantasy approach to the combat controls. It kind of matches how you might react and hit in real life. So again, they know what they were doing with it, and it's the direction that they chose, which is deliberate, and to make it as realistic as possible, similar to all the other aspects of the game. You know, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to preferences and what your style is. And even though I started to get used to it, I'm still not sure if the style of combat is what I prefer. So there's that. I'm absolutely sure though that if I played more and the more I stick with it, the more rewarding it would get. Also, you could just end up going through the entire game not really picking up a sword and just doing things stealthily. That is also another playstyle that you could do. Moving on to an element that I really love is the writing and the storylines they made. They did such a great job, and I also love the way that they weaved in the controlled part of the game in and out of the cutscenes, and in a lot of ways. It was like playing a movie because of that. I mean, I've already covered how I love the voice acting, but the voice acting means nothing without good writing. And so far, from what I've played, the writing was excellent. All the small details and dialogue, instances of humor to move things along, to snarky bits from the character, it all adds up to a great experience. I mean, you know how there are some games where sometimes you'd have just as fun watching someone play as you do playing it? Well, because of the story, the writing, and presentation, and just the endless possibilities with all the plethora of choices that you can make, this is one of those games. So let's talk a little bit about persuasion abilities, the different ways it's incorporated in the communication you have, and how it affects the gameplay. So persuasion plays a big role for you in this game, and it affects how successful you are in getting people to get you what you want or need in any given scenario. And this can include items or even opening up further branching storylines or information. So it's not a stat as much as it is an ability to come with certain choices on how to approach certain scenarios. So when it comes to persuasion, it's not going to be about picking the highest number. It's more about who you're talking to, what you look like, what your reputation is. So for example, if I'm going to threaten a bunch of thugs with violence, it's gonna be pointless. I'm gonna end up getting into a fight. But if I threaten violence to someone who I know doesn't know how to fight, I may be able to get my way. Another example is trying to convince someone that I'm rich, but then I don't look the part. No one's gonna believe you. And that's what I love about this game.
Say you were a scribe, or are you trying to tell me you're a knight and a scribe? Don't try to pull the wool over my eyes.
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 also has perk points to further deepen the RPG experience, and you get these every time you level up. You can spend the points to give unique modifiers to your stats. So for example, here you spend the points on something called featherweight within your agility stat, and in this case you get 30% reduction in fall damage, or you could use it in deft hand, which will let you learn how to use weapons quicker than normal. So there's a lot of different ways to use your perks depending on your playstyle. Now I say that this game is kind of like playing a movie, but at its core, it's an RPG as you get all the different customizations from what you wear, to what you say, to even how you act. If you want to be a jerk, you can. You can even be a smelly jerk, or even a drunk jerk if you drink too much. Later on, you can even smell like a dead body if you carried one, and even that will affect how people act. So not only is it an RPG, we're almost getting into a medieval simulator of sorts, and I mean that in the best possible way. I mentioned the bathing and drinking, but there's also things like hunger, or if you're hurt, you need to find something to eat, or you need to find a bandage. And there's so many other examples of this medieval simulator thing that they got going on, from the way you look and your appearance, and even things you have to do. I could go on and on and on, but the level of thought and authenticity or realism is really off the charts. So at the end of the day, how you choose to behave does affect your gameplay experience. For example, earlier on in the game, I'm at a point where I can only travel by foot, so getting around is pretty slow. But I came across a horse stable, and lo and behold, it's Pebble, my horse from the beginning of the game. And then from there, this guy is trying to sell me back my own horse, which to be honest kind of pissed me off. But the point is, all of my decisions will impact my gameplay. For example, what if I didn't see that horse stable until way later? Or what if I made a different decision than trying to just buy the horse again? Or a different decision on how to get my horse again.
You know they attacked an entourage by...
I digress, and I know I'm getting sidetracked here, but just like in real life, you can get sidetracked in the game. There's another part where you're looking for this dog, and you know me, I'm a dog lover, right? So of course I went off spending all this time looking for a dog, and then in that process, another quest pops up and I got sidetracked again. And it just branched off from there. And you know it's funny because going in, I had a goal of sticking to the main story because I wanted to go as far into the game as possible. But they created such a great world where you had so many options, it was almost impossible for me to kind of stick to the main storyline. And the thing about the side quests is that they don't feel cheap or forced. Like, you know how in some games you get a random quest and you just don't care and it feels like a checklist type of thing that you just want to get done with? Well, so far on the ones that I encountered, they all had fully fleshed out arcs with backstories or people that made it seem like it mattered. So that was really nice to see.
My dog got lost not far from...
This is a game where you can sink dozens and dozens of hours into, finish the game, and then when you play it again, you can still have a completely different experience. Mind you, each playthrough is about 80 to 100 hours. And speaking of experience, one thing that Sir Tobi mentioned about this game is that it's about the ride and the journey, not necessarily the outcome. And so far, I've really enjoyed the ride.
This is what we try really hard. Immersiveness is really the #1 thing we want to achieve with the game. We want you to play the game, delve deep into it, and just like everything you see in there should be plausible, and just like you are Henry, you are like in 1403. But what you are mentioning, I don't think we overwhelm the people with all the different things.
Exactly.
It's just there for you to use or ignore. So the alcoholism thing, for instance, if you drink...
Avoiding it altogether.
Absolutely. Right? If you drink alcohol, you have a buff. You can be better at speech or a little bit stronger, something like that. But if you overdo that, if you keep that level high for some time, you can get drunk. You can then get hangover, and at some point you can get an alcoholic. So it's more like you roleplay that part. You want to do that, fine. But then it comes with a negative, so you have to balance that out. If you're an alcoholic, you then have to get rid of that as well, because otherwise you have permanently negative stats unless you drink some things to... So really, it's a role-playing thing. And if you say, hey, funny, let me try that, go for it. If you say, hey, nah, I'm more like the good boy knight doing all the good deeds, then never touch it.